Hi, my name is Rev Paul, and I'm here to talk about God. We've got a lot of misconceptions about what God is, what God isn't in our history as people. I think it's a very personal thing. I think it's something that only you can know if you're really, only you can know it for yourself. There are artists, there are poets who have described it throughout time. It is, quite frankly, to me, the most important experience that I can have. And when I can consistently return to that experience and have it regularly, it creates a great confidence inside of me, inside of what I'm doing, inside of my heart, my mind, creates a consistency with my life. When I receive or listen to God and I receive what's going on with God from inside, it's an authority like none other, because it's an authority that only I can mediate. This is, people say God made me do it, or God said this, or God said that. I think when you're communicating about God and when you're putting God's inspirations into effect in your life, you have to run it through your ethical filter, your cultural ethical filter. The thing that God said for someone to do 1,000 years ago might not be relevant for someone to do today. It may not even be ethically correct. The idea behind the Bible is that it was said once, and when that single thing was communicated one time, those words as understood through that human, through that nervous system, is somehow eternal. That guidance, that communication that happened for that person in their culture, in their time, in their nervous system, in their particular situation. I'm not saying that God isn't wise enough or big enough to be able to communicate through humans across huge spans of time. What I'm saying is that humans aren't really that sophisticated enough to be able to interpret that and apply it, universally 100% of the time, 100% well. What I'm trying to say is that God is specific to the nervous system that it's communicating with. And I believe that I have nothing in my experience that says that every person with a nervous system can't experience that for themselves. I believe that is the actual best and ultimate quest in life, to be able to understand what the creator of all things, including the creator of you, is saying to you, to be able to understand it in a language that you speak, be able to take that and then put it into some kind of practice, either in your own heart, in your own mind, put it in practice for yourself. These sentiments are ones that I've come to over a very, very long period of contemplation, starting when I was 16. And I had my first introductory experience to God when I was on LSD for the first time. When I was a child, I would just be constantly trying to explain this one thing to everybody. And even if I wasn't specifically talking about that one thing, I was always trying to talk about that thing. I was always trying to set up the context to talk about that one thing. When I took LSD for the first time, LSD kind of accelerated my ability to get to the next step of what I was trying to explain. And I went into the oneness of all things, and as I was trying to explain it, and I was like, oh, that's it. And I am that thing I'm trying to explain. My first impulse was to tear off my clothes and run down the street and just shout, we're love, it's just us here. And I might tell that story a little bit later, but that was calmer heads prevailed. I didn't actually rip off my clothes and run down the street, but in a certain sense of saying it, I've always been trying to rip off my clothes and just be that one thing and run down the street and be like, this is it, we're one, we're love. This is what we are. So I'm 43 now, and I'm still doing that since the time I was 16. So, that's many, many years later. Paramahansa Yogananda, this is his book, Man's Eternal Quest. It's deep reading, but he speaks a lot about the quest in life, the primary quest in life being to find God and to understand God for oneself. And quite frankly, I mean, you can get a certain flavor for something from an artist, from an artistic creation, from a transmission, through the electromagnetic spectrum. If I'm in ancient Egypt and I'm carving in a relief wall and I'm trying to communicate something, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take something from my experience and I'm trying to translate it to the nervous system of another person. And I believe that is what creativity is. Creativity is the transmission between two nervous systems of an experience. And that's what teaching is. Teaching is trying to give to another person what we have experienced inside. But the truth is that when you care about something very deeply, like I care about God, I have been like walking this path, walking this rut, you could say, this groove in my heart for a very long time. And so in my communications, I'm going to try not to make any jumps that would be too much, but try to build little pieces so you can potentially take jumps for yourself. My whole point in this is you and I, we're the same. And obviously you've got a different skin color, you're a different age, you're different, maybe a different gender, whatever, different culture. We're the same. We come from the same source. Nervous systems come from the same source. They are created in the image and in the likeness of God. We know through science that our nervous system is not 100% unique. It's very similar to the nervous systems of other beings. So I believe that other beings are experiencing some part of what we experience in God. I'm not even sure, maybe some of them have got it better than we do. Maybe some of them have it closer than we do. They're more perfect creations. Certainly in humans, there is a great variety of different kinds of nervous systems and different kinds of incarnations, and people have different approaches to God and different understandings of it. I'm going to use this board behind you as my way of communicating. This is my classroom. This is my laboratory. In here, we're going to talk about God. We're going to talk about love. We're going to talk about your heart and how love is the steadiest way to approach the divine and to know the divine. I know that's kind of a cliche. I have searched for more than 20 years for the perfect way to describe God, to talk about what it is and how it works. And God's just the word for it. The one, the I am that. It is me. That is the realization that your search is complete, that you have found what you're looking for. That's what I'm trying to get across here. And I'm going to use this board, and I'm going to use every tool I can find and all the refinements that I have tried to make within my own consciousness as a teacher, as someone who wishes to express something from my nervous system to yours. So let's see how this looks. Here we have an image of the sun. Someone's holding like a radiant sun right down here in this place where the self is known to exist throughout human history. But the self is just a word, and it's a word that we'll talk about. Well, let's talk about it now. The self. Sometimes people talk about the self and it's like a psychological concept. It's something like, it's like myself, as myself as separate from other beings. I don't mind. I mean, that's one way of using the word. We don't have, if we had as many words as we had electromagnetic impulses through our nervous system, we would have all infinite words, and they'd be more like gradations of sound, like tones on the scale, or the way that you can take visible light and you can slice it up almost infinitely, like this red is different than this blue, along a gradation. The self, with the one I'm referring to, is the one at the heart of it all, the one at the core. At the core of it all, there is sort of a formless, I guess the Buddhists would call it an emptiness. It could be like a place that's radiant with light, like a pregnant void. I experience it as just an infinite nature. And when I am one with that infinite nature, I know myself as all things, because I think that a good way to describe our reality is as a mandala. So I've got a couple of mandalas here for you, but here you go. Here's one that people like a lot. You know what? This is more of a classic mandala. We'll start here. This mandala has a point source at the end, at an undifferentiated point source, and from that point source outward comes all the beauty and the radiance of geometric form. This is a geometric image. This is how the Islamic faith, the Muslim faith, it describes it. They describe God as a geometry, or they kind of point to it that way. The Jewish faith, there's a prohibition against putting God into form, and the reason for that, I believe, is because when you take the absolute infinite and put it into a form, if you're the one doing the putting into the form, what it is a struggle. You're like, it's everything! And you're like, okay, well, it's this thing too. Here's like kind of my image of what the everything is. And, if you say to another person, this is an image of God, did you capture the original one, or did you capture the representation? Well, you definitely caught the representation. But the representation, like the old Buddhist koan, is like the finger pointing at the moon. It's not, don't get caught on the finger, look towards the moon, look towards the source. That's why Akhenaten was like this Christ-like ruler of ancient Egypt. He only ruled for 3 years. That 3 years of Jesus's ministry. It's very potent there. The shared symbology is very, very potent. And he said before that there was all of the Egyptian lands, they would they would have like little deities per city. And each little deity per city would have like kind of a lock, like this is the temple of whatever. And when you go to this temple, you got to pay the tribute, you got to pay the tithes, there was like all these financial arrangements connected with God, which I have seen that turn off more people to God than almost anything. The idea that you can buy your way into heaven, and there are religions that let you do that, or they say you can do that. But I don't know. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's not. I don't think it is. I don't think that God is fooled by any of that, because, in a way, God is the consciousness of us all, is the sort of core of everything we can possibly think and be and understand and do. So it's not a source you're going to fool, okay? Because you're a derivation of that universalness. So you're not going to fool it. So anyway, that's why an insanely pure heart is needed to approach these kinds of concepts, because you can't take it with you. And you can't take the one everything and distill it down into a perfect representation, except the perfect representation that you're already distilling it into, that you already are. I know that sounds like gobbledygook. I apologize. Akhenaten. So Akhenaten was like, hey, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to free this shit up. All these people who are essentially under the thumb of all these various ruling classes in these various territories, he said there's only one God, and if you need a symbol for it, it's the sun. Because the sun is a great symbol of God, because it's like, I don't know how many millions times larger the sun is than the earth, but it's many, many, many million times larger. The earth is enormous. The earth itself is just preposterously large. And then the sun is preposterously larger than that. That's sort of like giving up. Like, it's just so big. That's the right attitude to have towards the one undifferentiated God. And yet, here we are, all as little nervous systems, walking around, potentially understanding our relationship with the one and communicating that into our world. It's magnificent. It's magnificent in a special way. So he did away with that. He said there's only one God, and it's like the sun, and if you need an image of it, call it the sun. And he changed so much for these 3 little years. Then they killed him for it, because, he's getting in the way of he's getting in the way of the social structure. He's getting in the way of the cash, the established order. They got rid of Akhenaten. But he had the same impulse that Jesus Christ had, which was to take the true nature of the infinite out of the hands of the very powerful and the that class and try to give it to everyone. That is beautiful. That is the gold at the heart of the message of teaching what God really is, transmitting what God is from one nervous system to another. That one I was showing you there, this little guy, this one is, it's got the flower of life in the middle of this kind of this infinite. And I love this little boundary void between the two. The flower of life, a beautiful symbol. So many people know the symbol these days. And some people know the story of how it came back into our world most recently. I'd love to talk about that. I'd love to talk about, once you've got an understanding of God, how you use the body to become a throne of God. How does one put God on the throne of one's body, of one's energy system, and can like worship God in form, in the human body, the true source of love? How can you worship it infinitely, right? This is the altar of our heart. This is the altar I want to talk about, because this altar you take with you anywhere. This is the altar you can take with you into a prison cell. This is the altar you can take with you when your body is destroyed. If I was hit by an asteroid right now, infinite explosion. And there would be something of me left. And it would be the energy form of me, the part of me that holds the pattern for how to make a human body and can bring it into this way. Let me just stop there and say, I love science. I love it very, very much. I think it can say a lot about the world. But because it's based on the mind, it can also be insanely tricky. When I was maybe 15 years old, I read a book by a scientist, and the scientist was the guy in the wheelchair. It's a brief history of time. That guy in the wheelchair, I forget his name. It's just silly that I'm forgetting it right now. But he basically, in his book, he said, and I hope I got the science right, but he said, that the universe has these things called black holes. And at the time, it was thought that the boundary of a black hole was so significant that nothing could escape from it. In that book, he essentially theorizes that the entire universe will become a cold, dark, dead, empty place because these black holes exist and they're absorbing stuff, and it goes in and it never comes back out. And so this was the mechanism by which the universe would become a cold, impersonal place where there was going to be no life and no nothing. I read that when I was like 15, and I was like, oh, the scientist understands the nature of reality. And for 3 days, I was super depressed about that. Then I realized, I was like, yeah, but that doesn't explain my experience. That doesn't explain what I've gone through. What am I trying to say here? My mind was empowered with a little tidbit of information that these black holes absorb everything, so it's all over. And it sort of understood that one fact, and then painted this quite dark reality, which was described in the book, and then that's it. Later, scientists discovered that no, it's not true. That there is this boundary, and apparently these little paired fundamental forces, not a fundamental force. It's like a proton and an antiproton, right? Like one would go in and one would escape. They found that there was actually a very subtle radiation, a very subtle release of energy from black holes, like a warm glow, so to speak. And I think there was a Nobel Prize that was awarded for that discovery. Reversal of that. It's a reversal of the thing. It basically shows that over a long time, a black hole can kind of give up all of its energy back out into the universe. So the whole and the balance, and it's all established. They figured that out later. My point being, the mind can grasp and understand things and can sort of take the reins and say, that's it, I know, I understand what's going on. And that's a little bit of a trap for us all, because there is an experienced reality that has a much grander body than the mind. So yeah, if it's like you can't use the mind to understand like all the realities. It can understand a lot of them, and it can understand some of them. But the cool thing about the mind is it's always going to get an update. There's some eternal things that the mind can hold, like little wisdom koans that it can hold and kind of play around with. But it really, the practical day to day, the mind and the thinking that we do, the thinking that I do, it can be updated. And so is it really the ultimate expression of truth that we can like run through our minds and like, understand from there? I do think that we can understand the great truth, but I think that's a transcendent experience. It transcends the mind. It transcends the emotions. It transcends the body. It transcends a lot of these things that we think of as perfect containers for this stuff. And my subject is God. I am Rev Paul, and I am here to tell y'all that God is real. For me, God is real, and God can be real for you with enough diligence, with enough interest in figuring out what it really is. You can know what it is, and you can experience it, and you can grok it for yourself. So let's begin.